And hello, and welcome to another episode of AWS on Stack Overflow. My name is John Rotenstein. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and I like answering questions on Stack Overflow. So I thought, why not have a show? And I get to answer questions online with your help. If there's any topics you find interesting, we love to discuss them as well. I get easily sidetracked on a lot of these topics. So hello to all of you who are out there today. And Brads, you must always be online on Twitch. Thank you for being such a loyal viewer. Maybe I'm just in the right time zone for where you're located. Who else is online out there? Please feel free to say hello. Got some interesting topics lined up for today as well. So let me get this set up. So for those of you who are fairly new to Stack Overflow, it can be a confusing website when you first go there. It's just got all these questions and things, but once you're really into it, it's a very efficient, very well-made platform, highly scalable, and works extremely well. So I have a search that I have set up that finds me any questions to do with Amazon or AWS. You can find the details in my bit.ly link just here. And I generally, a couple of times a day, look through and see what questions are there. So we'll have a look now and see if there's any interesting questions to answer, or I've also marked a few that I saw earlier on today. In fact, I've got a few questions here. I like to teach Stack Overflow as I go. Hey, Jeffrey, good to have you along. It's your first time. Have you ever landed on Stack Overflow? It's what I always like to ask all my viewers. Have you ever gotten some information out of Stack Overflow? Have you ever asked a question on Stack Overflow? And have you ever answered a question on Stack Overflow? Because I'd like to show you how easy it is to help answer questions, and you get these reputation points and they make you go all excited. It makes you answer even more. I've got quite a few reputation points. I've got over 140,000 reputation points here. I've been doing it for over 5 years. And if I click on the right link here, it tells me that for this year, I'm the 72nd biggest contributor, or biggest earner of reputation points that can be obtained by asking questions and giving answers. It's a great distraction. Fantastic. Oh, you want me to take a look at a question straight off the bat? Oh, this could be dangerous. Let's have a look at what that question is. And I've got a question about MQTT and AWS. Well, hopefully between me and the viewers, we'll be able to answer for that as well. Happy to answer questions that come up. I can't always promise that I can answer everything. So let's see. Here's a question that Brads has put up. Not from you, is it? No, but I see you've tried contributing to it. Let's have a read. I connected Lambda to EFS. So, talk about distractions. So AWS Lambda, our serverless compute. Normally you only get 512 meg of local disk storage in a Lambda function, which makes it very hard to decompress large zip files and things like that. But you can now attach a Lambda function to our EFS Elastic File Store. Is that what EFS stands for? Elastic File System. And Elastic File System is a file system you can attach to EC2 Linux instances and now to Lambda functions, so you can have more storage. I connected to Lambda to EFS, and I want to download small file from S3 to EFS using Lambda. Fair enough. I connected the Lambda function to the file system and added an access point. I have this Python function. I get a timeout after 1 minute. I download to /temp. It works. Okay. I've given lots of permissions. Why can't I download? And Brad is saying, can you write to EFS directly? That's a good try. So last time on this show, when I attempted to mount EFS on a Lambda function, I didn't fully get it to work. I'd never really played with EFS. And so the only way to really know this is to try it ourselves. So, security groups. Security groups. Are there security groups on an EFS mount point? Last week we tried an experiment where I launched an EC2 instance in a totally private VPC with a VPC endpoint for Systems Manager, and I wanted to log into the SSH in the instance. So VPC, no internet gateway. No connection to the outside world, but a VPC endpoint that punches out to SSM launch an EC2 instance that goes through that VPC endpoint, connects to the SSM service, and you should be able to SSH into it. And I failed. And after the show, I did some experimenting. Guess what? Security groups. I had not allowed the security group on the VPC endpoint that I didn't know existed, and that would have been all that was needed to get us going. So let's see. The EC2 instance and mount target have security groups. I like that. So the mount target security group. So if we go back to their question, they didn't mention anything about security groups. So who recommended this? Max Payne. Max Payne. I highly suggest you go into here and you register to Stack Overflow, create a username if you haven't, and you are free to add a comment to this question and ask that exact question. If you don't want to, I'll do it for you, or Brad's will even do it for you. But that's probably a good thing to ask before we try and reproduce everything that's going on there. I like that idea because it would explain why it's not quite working. So yeah, if you don't do it, Brad's will certainly do that. What else we got here? Jeffrey saying, what's the best way to address the ELB to migrate? Come back to NQTT. What's the best way to address an ELB to migrate to ALB using EKS? Do we have a native AWS CNI strategy? I don't know. I'm not an EKS person. Brad's, are you an EKS person? You can answer Jeffrey's question there. I'm just sitting here to let all of you talk to each other, really. That's my job. I'm a developer advocate. I like talking to developers out there, so feel free to do it. Oh, I should show off this week's shirt. I don't know where I got this shirt, but I have ended up wearing this shirt to many real-life escape rooms. I don't know if you enjoy escape rooms. Back before COVID, I enjoyed doing quite a few of them. And I especially enjoy visiting the US. Whenever I go there, I'd hop in and do some escape rooms because you can share with other people, whereas in Australia, you've got to book the whole room for yourself. So shout out for my shirt. Brad's doesn't know much. EKS, the Elastic Kubernetes service that runs effectively on top of ECS, but it's for the Kubernetes variety. So, Jeffrey, I highly encourage you to create a question. If you do want to create a question and you want to do it in the right way, I always like to plug Stack. There is a fantastic video, this thing, good Stack Overflow citizen. And okay, it runs for an hour, but it is one of the creators of Stack Overflow talking about how to create a really good Stack Overflow question. It really involves giving as much information as possible, allowing people to reproduce it, giving it a good title. If you're into Stack Overflow, highly recommend watching that video. You can speed it up a little bit. Good for asking questions out there. Oh, you have a question there already. This is your So this is an example. I hate to point out to you there, Jeffrey. This is an example of not a good Stack Overflow question. So let's see if we can slightly improve it and help you get some answers out there. Not that I understand it. So I'll put your big question inside here. Oh, if you have enough reputation on Stack Overflow, you have the ability to edit other people's questions and answers. With great power comes great responsibility, said some small creature. And so I try to use it wisely, but improving questions so that other people can answer them better can be a good thing. Now, best way to address the ELB, the load balancer, to migrate to ALB. Always like expanding acronyms. Amazon EKS or AWS EKS. Always get confused on EKS, which I'm not going to expand. And I don't know what a CNI. What's AWS CNI strategy? Contain CNI customer networking. Oh, it's an EKS thing. Yeah. I don't even know how to summarize this question because I don't know what you're quite asking. Best way to address it. I'm just going to leave it there because I have no idea what you're asking. The thing about AWS, there's so much of it. There's so much. One person can't answer everything. So sorry there, Jeffrey, but hopefully you'll get some hits. If you want to get more people there, please edit your question, add as much detail as possible so that somebody understands what you're doing, and tell us what you've tried and what you've failed is often a good way of getting more people to answer questions there as well. Okay, Max is answering lots of questions, or is he asking? So, IoT core requires certs. Yep. So MQTT is a bit slow. You want something faster. So for my limited understanding with IoT, AWS IoT MQTT, sending web requests has a lot of overhead. You know, you might think your web browser is really fast sending requests and all that, but there's a lot that goes on an HTTP core. So there's this thing called MQTT that of course stands for what does it stand for? MQ telemetry transport, message queuing telemetry transport. There you are. We've all learned something today. Basically, it's a very lightweight protocol that a lot of small devices without a lot of RAM, without a lot of processing power, can send messages without a lot of overhead. And run on other protocols as well, where network bandwidth is limited. So I've used MQTT with our IoT service. I've created some Sumerian scenes where clicking on things within Sumerian sends a message to IoT. What is Sumerian? Sumerian is an AWS service that lets you create Sumerian. It lets you create 3D scenes. It was all the rage, and I don't know if people are using it in any great way, but Sumerian allows you to create 3D scenes, interact with it, send data to IoT. So when people click on things, it could send a message to IoT that then reacts in real life. And I did a really interesting demo one time. See if I've got a bit of a movie here for you. And where is my movie? Here's my movie. And I will commentate this for you. I set up a demonstration one time at a trade show. And this is a little farm that I created. And it's powered by a deep lens looking at a table. So this deep lens is looking at some post-it notes on the table. And it's having a look where the post-it notes are placed and what angle they're at. And as you move the post-it notes and turn the angle of the notes, it updates the farm animals on the screen up here. And hopefully you'll see it here as I move the post-it notes. The various animals update, and that's actually powered by IoT. The deep lens senses where it is, sends a message to IoT. Sumerian running in the browser on my computer then polls IoT and says where are the locations, and it updates the animals accordingly. And if you make the animals point a certain direction, they might get off a little bit of gas, or if they go into the farm shed, they might reproduce and make more animals. So had a bit of fun making that Sumerian thing. So I have used MQTT to send those messages, but otherwise I can't really add a lot of information in there. So more questions that I couldn't answer. Fantastic. I think we're done there. A few things about the user interface here. There is a little thing which you can pull down which tells you your achievements in Stack Overflow. So as you ask questions, answer questions, get upvoted, you can receive reputation points on Stack Overflow. So this is telling me that I got 150 reputation yesterday. I've answered some questions today and getting it. And the great thing about Stack Overflow is the gamification. The fact that somebody says, thank you for answering that question, and it encourages you to answer more questions, which is always fantastic. This other little thing is telling me that some other people have come back with some topics that I've been participating in. So let's have a look at this. This question, let's see what they came up here. They were trying to troubleshoot SSH login failure for EC2 using PowerShell. I was creating my EC2 server, Red Hat and Ubuntu, and was trying to log in through SSH. They generated a PEM file for Ubuntu. They then used PuTTyGen to convert the PEM file to a PPK file. PuTTy is the only program in the whole world that uses a PPK file, and when they connected in, they got a server refused. Now, one thing you might not notice here on the screen, if I throw it up really big, they were logging in as EC2 user. If you log into an Ubuntu instance, at least off the standard AMIs that we provide, you have to log in as a user called Ubuntu rather than a user called EC2. So I put that comment. Wee! And they said they have done Ubuntu, and that wasn't the problem. So if that wasn't the problem, somebody else is helping them get through there. Did you make the animals yourself, or were those pre-made? So for Sumerian, there is animals Google. Google has an environment for creating 3D objects similar to, I think they call it Google Plex. What's the Google 3D system? That's, wow, look at this. Augmented reality at home. That's even better animals than you can get out there. I will check my pinboard. Animals. Pinboard is a great website for social bookmarking, things that you want to find again in future. You can, oh, here it is. Great service. So there is a similar service on Google called Google Poly, and they have libraries of animals that somebody made. So here is a huge list of animals out there, and you can bring them in and use them on various projects that understand the 3D modeling. So really cute animals that somebody made, and I just brought them into my project. Poly, I think it's polygoogle.com. Yep. And to give you an example, you can come in here and take a unicorn, no, a horse, just a horse. And here in your browser, because browsers are amazing these days, browsers have these built-in capabilities you'd never be aware of. And if the model eventually loads up, now I have my 3D model. It looks like it's animated. That's quite an impressive model. And you can see it's got lighting effects from the bottom, called Google Poly. And it's compatible with bringing objects into Amazon Sumerian. John says, Max, is there anything besides AWS DMS to help keep Postgres and Redshift in sync to each other? Please don't say glue or data transfer. So AWS DMS, our database migration service. And this is pretty neat for two reasons, really. Number one, it has lots of database connectors. If we pop into the documentation, I love having random topics coming here, especially if I can answer them. So you can see here in the documentation, it's got sources and targets. So it can bring in information from Oracle, SQL Server, Azure SQL Database, that's a new one, SAP, Mongo, S3, etc. And it can write the data out to many of those databases, including Amazon Redshift. So it's a great way to bring information into Redshift. So our database migration service is fantastic for bringing data in from some external database, whether it's on the cloud or not, and bring it into the cloud, or export your data from the cloud. The second thing it's really good at is it's really not a migration service. It's really a replication service. And once you've migrated your data between databases, you can keep running DMS, and it will do regular data chain, CDC, data change capture, change data capture, CDC. It will, on a regular basis, look at what has changed in the source database and migrate it to the target. So it's not just for a one-off migration. You can also use it for a continuous migration. So CDC is awful, is it? Oh, okay, that's not too good. Doesn't keep the databases in sync. You're going from Postgres to Redshift. So the good thing about Postgres is Redshift is based on Postgres 8.06, so they're very compatible databases. I used to be in a role where I maintained a data warehouse, and I actually exported from one Postgres and imported into another Postgres database on a daily basis, mostly doing full loads. And it's really easy to do that with Postgres because you can do a pg dump command and then send it into a pg SQL command. But if you're wanting to do updates on changes, that's a little bit harder. There is a product in Australia. I'm now trying to remember the name of the company that does it. The word breeze comes into my mind, but breeze, something like that. There's a good Australian company that has a product that can do lots of migrations for you. Not that I want you to necessarily go out and buy another third-party product. Australian migration, AWS Redshift. I'll find their name. Pacific East. Where is Australia? Is can't find them. I'm terribly sorry. Postgres to Redshift CDC exports data to S3 and then does a Redshift load. So the best way to bring data into Redshift is to use the Redshift copy command. We've gone way off topic here, haven't we? I love Redshift, by the way. Redshift is frankly the reason why I joined Amazon. I was working at a previous company, starting to use Redshift and liked it so much, I joined the company. And the thing I love about Redshift is it uses standard SQL, but it's really, really big. You can have, instead of millions of rows in a table, you can have billions of rows. And Redshift is just a beautiful system for doing that. And the most efficient way to load data into Redshift is by using the copy command, because it runs in parallel across all nodes, does the distribution and sorting of data, and works really well. You can insert data into Redshift by running the insert command, which we recommend you do in batches, large batches, not just single rows. But yeah, if you're doing a lot of exports and imports, it does, the best way to load is through the copy command. But doing change data capture is always hard, because tracking what's different in one system versus the other. What I used to do is in Postgres, but not in Redshift, you can add a trigger on rows in tables. And you can say to the trigger, whenever this row changes, run this little stored procedure. And I had the stored procedure update the date on another column of the row. So in Postgres, someone adds or updates a row, my stored procedure automatically adds a modification date on that row. I could then run a command that exports everything that had a modification date since a certain date. So that lets me dump all the changes, and then I could import it into a database. So you might be able to write it yourself by using that sort of method to get it loaded up. Postgres trigger is a great thing. Postgres triggers are not supported in Redshift, however, but for getting them in, that could be a good way of doing it. I wish I could remember the name of that Australian software company that does Australian utility. Just can't remember their name. It'll come to me, no doubt, as soon as the show ends. Oh well, bad. Using Vim syntax to fix your comments on Stack Overflow. Fantastic. Let's have a look. Any other questions that I've missed out there? If there is, just remind me. Solid Snake, what did you say there? Preparing for the Certified Architect exam. Do you have any advice? Yes, Solid Snake. I would recommend you, of course, watch my other show on Stack Overflow, which is called CQ, the Certification Quiz Show, where each week we go through a number of certification questions that I create, and go to the official page, and we have an expert come on the show and answer the questions. And my channel, I think it is, oops, youtube.com/CQJohn. Yes, CQ John is my channel. And so each episode of CQ, we concentrate on a particular exam. We do a lot of solutions architect exams, and you can try and get the right questions. We discuss why they're the correct answers, etc. So that's a great way of learning, especially if you think you know what you've got and you just want a bit of encouragement to do it. I was just talking to somebody the other day. In fact, it was Derek, who was on our latest show here. And he was saying a good tip before doing the certification exam is you can do some practice tests. I think we charge $20, and you can do the practice test before your exam. And his experience is whenever he did the practice exam, he failed the practice exam but passed the real exam. So maybe you can take his advice and not worry too much about the exam. So go and watch CQ. Let's look for a question that I might be able to answer here. Dynamodb. Redirecting from a load balancer to S3. That's an interesting concept. I'm going to fix some of their formatting here. It's like fixing formatting in these questions. Looks like they've got some headings. Rather than pasting web links into questions, oh, what just happened then? Rather than pasting links, I always like to do links that describe the name of what's out there. And I've got this little plugin you'll get from my link here that allows me to replace links with markdown friendly things. Oh, you've got a question. Very good. Okay, let's read this question now that I've formatted it. So it's got S3, one file in S3. It's an HTML page that uses website hosting. We don't want to use S3 to be public access. We have an application load balancer for OIDC authentication. OIDC? ODBC? Oh, OpenID Connect. Oh, OpenID. Help future readers know what that means. OpenID. Was it Databricks? No, Databricks makes it really great. They've got a new data lake product. Databricks have a new thing called Delta Lake, I should just mention. One of the great things about like Amazon Athena is you can store data in S3 and query your data directly off S3. Redshift Spectrum also lets you do this. And it works by, if you want to add data to the virtual database, you just add another file to a certain directory and suddenly it's available in Athena. But if you want to delete data, you've got to delete the file. If you want to insert data, you've got to add a file. You can't get row level type things. And what Databricks has done is they've come up with this thing called Delta Lake, an open source storage layer. And it sits sort of on top of S3 and it creates a virtual layer and it literally allows you to insert and update and delete data in S3, and it sort of creates a virtual layer that manages all that for you without you having to edit the individual data files themselves. So I've seen some demos of it, haven't played with it myself, but if you're really into data lakes, creating lots of data in S3, I recommend you have a look at the Databricks Data Lake OpenID Connect. ID. Thank you. This is just like pair programming. My son is doing computer science in university, and he does his assignments, but I like to sit there and be like pair programming and help. You missed a semicolon, you haven't defined that variable, and pair programming is always lots of fun. They're using application load balancer for OpenID Connect authentication, not balancing use. That's interesting. They're using the ALB is redirecting to the web hosting page. How can I make sure I can only access the bucket in S3 via the ALB? What about controlling it by the global IP of the source of the connection? Wow. So a load balancer can point to any HTTP endpoint, can point to an EC2 instance, and it can point to a Lambda function. But using an ALB to redirect to S3 would not necessarily work because S3 has many, many IP addresses. Can you send an ALB to a bucket name? But it wouldn't authenticate, so that's totally useless because you may as well just point to S3 directly rather than going through the ALB. So I don't know why they want to do that. Well, CloudFront, yeah, CloudFront can provide authentication. Quite right, Max. Simplify login with application load balancer, built-in authentication. Oh, they're using an ALB for authentication. So you can define authentication within your load balancer. Go to OpenID Connect. That is very creative. That's very creative. Very weird. So I highly encourage any of you who have a thought on this one to add some comments, what they're doing. Origin policies, yeah, you're correct. If they just want to have public access to that S3 file, but not public access to the whole bucket. Very weird. What else do we think? Why? Oh, is he? They're wanting to make users authenticate. So I wonder if what this does is if you put OpenID Connect in front of the load balancer, it forces the user to authenticate. And once the user has authenticate, it will then provide the content. So effectively, they're putting a login barrier in front of static HTML content, which you would traditionally do with your own backend application running something like Cognito. You could even put Cognito in the web page and have it go back and authenticate. AWS Cognito or Amazon Cognito? The general rule is if you can use it on its own, it's called Amazon. So it's called Amazon Cognito. So I'm saying you could authenticate through the web browser to Cognito that does not require a backend service. And then the browser gets temporary credentials that allows you to call back to other services. And I've done that in a demo that I did recently for Lambda, where I have a web page, calls Cognito, gets back some credentials, and then actually directly communicates with Dynamodb. And that's all just done in the browser with no backend. So that could work. Interesting. Time for a diversion. I don't know if any of you saw this. YouTube came out. This is Lambda set to Hamilton, and I'll let you play it because it goes for like 6 minutes. But I must say the lyrics are fantastic, and the graphics are amazing. It looks like they're using, is this Apple Memojis or something, where they film people and it replaces their heads and does things? Yeah, the lyrics are great, but I'm just amazed by how they actually did the graphics and things in there as well. It goes a bit long, but if you're into Hamilton, it's got great things. And there's even some cameos by people who look like Werner. And here's Werner. Hello, Werner. Werner Vogels, who you'll see a lot at our various events. And there's even a Jeff Barham person in there at some point. Where's Jeff with the purple hair? There he is. So that's Jeff Barr and Werner Vogels. Was it rendered? They don't say how this was made. I looked at the data and it doesn't say how they put it together. So if you find out, please let me know. It's really, really good. It really looks like Jeff Barr as well. That's my little bit of fun for this week. Yeah, it's a really great thing. Sorry, I don't have my sound hooked up here. Back to some questions. I always use the headings. Serverless for ECS. How to create a new VPC security group. Just go to the console. There's a great scene in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't know if you've listened to that. Excellent radio series. And there's a radio broadcast in there where the announcer says, "Oh, I'm broadcasting out to all intelligent life forms out there, and to all the rest of you, the secret is to bang the rocks together, guys." So use the console here. I'm doing an AWS course following the steps to create a MySQL database. When I started creating the database, at additional connectivity VPC security group, I'm not able to find choose existing and create new options. How can I create? Oh, okay, so I might have changed the console. So it is saying you can create a new security group in there. Here's the picture from the course, but it's not in my settings. And somebody has come through and said there's been some UI changes. Click the choice field and you'll see create new VPC item. Oh, did you notice the console changed in EC? No, not EC2. It did change in EC2, but Lambda was the most recent change. EC2 had this page, so this page has been slightly updated lately to the more modern look. But the real scary one is Lambda has changed. So I used to write a lot of hands-on labs, and whenever the UI changes, it means I have to go and update a lot of labs. So you might remember there used to be a save button up here where you would modify your function and save it. That has now moved down here to be a deploy button. So any instructions you read that in Lambda that says click save, you now have to click deploy. The reason they've changed that functionality. Iterate over a file on Windows 10. I'm frequently requested to delete specific list of S3 keys and find their sizes. This would be in keys. How would I accomplish this on the Windows command shell? So they've got a file of file names and they want to get the names. This is perfect for a bit of a Python program. Do you think they'd accept a Python code to get that? You could grep it. You do lots of, oh, and they're removing it. They're listing the file and then they're deleting the file. Delete specific or find their sizes. And he's doing both in the same thing. And he's got a while error inside. Is this PowerShell? Can't tell if it's PowerShell or just normal shell. Very normal shellish. File read line. I'd just do Python. Given some links there, so I won't bother. How fast can an EC2 Linux instance run Python code? How can I use data pipeline? That's a very short question. Here's a good one. I saw this before. Let's say I've set up Amazon simple notification service with 3 subscribers. I'd like to know when all the subscribers have received or processed the message in order to mark that message as processed, generate some metrics. So let's define a few things here. What is SNS? Our simple notification service allows you to create a topic. Max, the last person in chat. I create an SQS topic here called StackMax, and it allows me to subscribe to this topic. And here's the main thing about SNS. It allows me to, so if I send a message to my SNS topic, every subscriber receives a copy of that message, but the way you receive it can be different. We can send it to an HTTP endpoint, maybe got a web server or something, a REST endpoint. We can send it by email, by SQS, so it'll store it in a queue for later processing, trigger a Lambda function that's really good, and send a message to your mobile phone via an SMS message. And each of these have different methods of sending and methods of retries that are out there. Oh, Brad's, you answered that one. Go down here. Oh, Brad's answered. I won't see what he's got there, but it's worth discussing. Now, I do know that if you want to track success of these things, you've got to use CloudWatch logs, I think. AWS SNS logging send. Monitor SNS text delivery using CloudWatch. I did this recently. My SNS messages were not sending, and I turned on logging and found out it's because I had a bad sender ID. But let's see. Message delivery status for HTTP endpoints, Lambda and SQS. And the way it works is you turn on delivery status logging, give it a roll, and where does it go? Here's the protocols. Oh, it sends it to an SNS topic. Doesn't, does it? Let's see what Brad wrote. Looks like he copied those exact pages. Once you're in CloudWatch, you can draw the metrics. So it sends it to CloudWatch, does it? That Lambda video is fantastic. So what does it say? Of topics, where does it send the logging? Will be sent to CloudWatch logs. Yep. So you've got to subscribe to CloudWatch logs, which will then have a record for each attempt, or at least whether it's sent or not. And then you can generate metrics from CloudWatch logs to go to a CloudWatch real metric. And then you could trigger off that. So I'm just going to say, Brad, looks like you did good. I'll give you an upvote. Your formatting is excellent. There is nothing for me to change here either. There are very good links in there. Very nice bold headings. Good work. Let's pay a visit to Brad's page. You've only been a member for 5 years, and only recently started answering lots. Fantastic. And on lots of topics that I don't understand either. And you haven't asked a question for a while, so good work. Try and get those reputation points up. And I shall jump to some questions I bookmarked earlier, so we have a bit of fun here. That was one of them. Oh, this is interesting. Somebody asked a question here, and in between the time, it's 3 minutes ago, the question was deleted. So is John Skeet still answering half the questions on Stack Overflow? I don't think so. John Skeet is well known as the top answerer on Stack Overflow, but he has competition, not from me. From this fellow, Gordon Linoff. So Gordon Linoff answers every single question on Stack Overflow that's about SQL, and answers in no time at all. And doesn't chat much, he just answers all the questions. He's therefore something like one of the fifth most regular contributors to AWS questions, because a lot of AWS questions are also tagged with SQL. And so you'll see here that Gordon is very, very close to John Skeet. But if you look in terms of contributions, Gordon is the #1 contributor this year so far, with about as much reputation as I have, and John Skeet is nowhere to be seen anymore. Let's see where he is. He's 15th. Look at that. He's got half the reputation of Gordon Linoff this year. So John Skeet has a challenger. I'm quite high. Yeah, I'm in the let's see, all time. By all time, it's been done over 5 years though, so taken a while. I'm all time number 532 on Stack Overflow, and even though it says I've been a member for 11 years, I've only really been doing a lot of this in the last 5 years. But then we have people like Marson, who is a fantastic contributor on AWS. He has started answering heaps and heaps of AWS questions on here. And if I go to the AWS tag and say, show me the top users, then Marson is actually the top contributor over the last 30 days. I'm only half as good as him. Chris Williams is also a fantastic contributor. And all of them can often be found in the Stack Overflow room, to which I invite you. This is a little room where a lot of us chat about questions online, have a general chit chat. You are most welcome to frequent this room, say hi to us, and ask for some additional assistance if you so care to do it. Lots of people answering questions there. Where were we? I was going to my bookmarks. Oh, and I was talking about this question. That's right. Before I got sidetracked. If you have an IoT, oh, that's right, because you've already posted the IoT question. If you haven't posted it, be sure to ask there, Max. Here's an example of somebody who deleted their own question, and this is highly encouraged on Stack Overflow. So sometimes you ask a question and you find the answer, and the answer might be, oh, I left out a semicolon, or you did something that is not helpful to other future viewers, readers on Stack Overflow. So we highly encourage people to delete their own questions. You're also allowed to answer your own questions. So if you spent 6 hours and you just came up with the best solution for something, and you think it would help other people, you are welcome to post a question describing the problem you had, and then an answer describing the answer you just gave, and that's perfectly okay, and people will even upvote you and say thank you for that information. Don't put the answer in the question, make sure you post a question and an answer. It's also possible to delete answers on there. Sometimes people point out the errors in my answers, and I will happily delete my question if it is not of service to the community. I have an old question actually out there which people ask, how do you get a list of all AWS services? And that's changed over time. And I have a upvoted and correctly answered question. I probably can't find it, which now has some slightly incorrect information in the question. I can't in the answer. I can't delete the answer because it was marked as the correct answer, and I can't delete an answer that's marked as a correct answer. So instead, somebody's gone in and edited and said, the information's changed. Please look at the other answers in there. A question from the coder. Can you restrict IAM instance profile to specific Linux accounts? When associating an EC2 instance with an IAM role via associate instance profile, it seems that all Linux users on the instance can make API calls to those credentials. Is there a way to leverage IAM instance profile but restrict access to specific users in the OS? So let's clarify what's being spoken about there. When you launch an EC2 instance, you can associate an IAM role with that instance. So if I pick my ops instance here, go in this fancy new interface, and look somewhere for a role. Down here it says I have associated a role called the ops role. In the old days you could only associate a role with an instance when you launched it, but now you can change that whenever you wish. And because I have launched it with a role, I can go to the magic 169.254, 169.254 latest metadata, and it comes back offering me, oh, I haven't logged in my instance, that's not working. If I log into my instance, setting my security groups in another window so I can do so. Here I am in an instance and I run that metadata command. It comes back and says, oh, you have some security credentials associated with this instance. So I run that command again, say /security credentials. And it says, no, I want that. I want IAM security credentials. And it comes back and got it wrong. I think it's going funny. Latest metadata, IAM security credentials. It says I've got an ops role, and if I was to append that to the end, you would see my credentials that I don't want to give you. So as a result, I can run commands on my instance such as this that goes off and talks to S3, and I don't have to give it credentials. It's using the IAM role associated with my instance, using the instance metadata service to pass those credentials. So Max is saying no. So this person is saying they have different users on the instance who want to get access to different credentials, and can they separate it down? So I agree with Max's answer, no. If you can access that magic URL, then you can get the credentials. There was somebody here who was saying, not there, I saw somebody suggest that you might be able to use IP tables to block it, but I don't think IP tables works on a per user basis on a Linux machines, but that's a bit of creative thinking. So the simple answer is no. You would have to store your local credentials on there. Oh, here it is. That's the theoretically IP tables. In the C2. How could we get around this? What are some creative ways? You could use assume role. So you could have one role that is then used to assume other roles. Does that work? Can you assume a role from an assumed role? Another way might be just to store credentials. with a simple no answer. But good try. There's this EC2 instance metadata version 2. You familiar with this version 2 thing? Here it is. The EC2 instance metadata service v2, and they've added additional security on top of this thing. And when you request certain data, you have to provide a secret token back to the instance. And to be honest, I've never quite understood what this is used for, but you basically create a session and then do it. I think what this might be is if you have an application, let's say you have an application which allows you to download content. So you might give it a URL of an image, and it downloads that image, and maybe it lets you do some image editing. Somebody can type in a URL and the program goes fetches it. They could theoretically type in that instance metadata URL 169.254, etc. And that means the person could, through your application, get hold of your credentials and then do naughty stuff in your account. So with instance metadata service version 2, just knowing the URL is not enough. You actually have to be able to get a token from one area and then pass it back to another area. And then it grants you back. So you've got this magical, get me the latest token, and then you've got to pass that token in your request for the metadata. So that can be a good way of preventing certain services from using the metadata against your wishes. But I don't think it would fix things in this particular case. This is an interesting one. Any WordPress people out there? I use WordPress. I changed the admin password. A problem starts here. Oh, this is interesting. They created a WordPress site. Everything was good. They then created an auto-scaling group and a load balancer and launched multiple WordPress instances behind the load balancer. So my alarm bells start to go off a little bit here. And then they said, when there's only one EC2 instance, they can log in with their credentials. When there's more than one EC2 instance, I'm not able to log into my WordPress site. Why is it happening? Both instances have their own EFS volumes. EFS is not shared. EC2 is the same images. So my first concern is that isn't WordPress has got a database behind it? And how does it share the database with all of the instances? So that's my first concern. Can WordPress successfully run behind a load balancer? And the second problem is load balancers, of course, send traffic between machines. So if you're trying to log into one machine, the machine that sends you the login page might not be the one you log into. And then when you go and try and go to another page, it might send you to another one. So I don't think WordPress is a particularly good site. Oh, do you think session stickiness would work? AWS ELB sticky sessions. There is this thing where you can ask for a sticky session, and it adds a little cookie to your request so that when you come back in through the load balancer, it recognizes that and sends you to the same machine. Application load balancers support sticky sessions. By the way, have you noticed how this lights up? Have you seen this in Google lately? Where you can do a web search and, oh, it disappeared. And it highlights, if I refresh the page, it might do it. After a web search, it highlights certain things. And this is a new feature that Google's added in Chrome, where you can specify this parameter after a URL, and it tells the web browser what to highlight on a page, which is really quite interesting. So you might be able to use sticky sessions. Incoming traffic is distributed across It adds it to a header. It probably won't work with HTTPS, right? If the load balancer terminates HTTPS, then it can put it in the header, so that might be okay. We'll recognize with a Z, Z, or an S. AWS load balancer key. Yeah, good reference. The figures, you know, they're probably not using classic load balancer. Whenever something goes out of date on AWS, we like calling it classic. Well, that's 2010. That's a bit old. Want ALB sticky sessions. Sticky sessions. Here we are. See. That might satisfy them. I still think they're a bit crazy putting WordPress. I might ask a comment. So if you're asking a question, you put in a comment. If you're giving an answer, you put an answer. WordPress also stores media files on disk, so they have to share that. Cool. Time for something distracting. I have an interesting topic here that is influenced by a question. And I'm just trying to find the question. This is... Oh, no. Oh, there's a really interesting question that I want to bring up that gives a good hint. Try and find it. I am talking about Stack. I think I marked it here. Really want this question. How can I search for it? I can search for it because I have added comments. Question. Comments. So it brings up the whole question. Here we are. Oh. I want S3 mount. My mounting question. Oh dear. So someone was asking basically how can they were having a problem with mounting an S3 volume on their instance and getting things working. And I'll do a quick attempt here. S3 mount FS. Newest questions. Here it is. So this person, they're having troubles mounting an S3 bucket to an Ubuntu instance. I didn't have a bookmarked. I've looked at several tutorials on mounting S3 with S3FS. Oh, is this the question? No, this is not the question. Terribly sorry. They basically went mad at me. Really good. Yes, this is it. No, this is not it. Terribly sorry. Newest. Go on with my topic, even if I can't find the question. I basically told them it is not a good idea to mount S3 as a bucket. And there's a number of services out there like S3FS that allow you to mount things as a bucket, and they're not totally reliable. But I thought I'd have a bit of a look out there and have a look at what services allow you to do interesting things with S3. And there's a number of products out there that let you do things. There's S3 Command, which is very similar to the AWS command line interface. S3FS that lets you mount S3 buckets on Linux systems. Cloudberry have a product called Cloudberry Drive. Cloudberry have since renamed themselves actually MSP360, I think is an awful name, but they've got a product here for Windows that allows you to mount an S3 bucket as a drive, which I have used quite successfully. Cyberduck, lots of you might know Cyberduck. Cyberduck is an excellent program for FTP and S3 type communications. Ooh. Updated. So here is an example of Cyberduck connected into my S3 account, and I can see all the S3 services, so I can drag and drop things to S3. But they also have a product called Mountain Duck, and I thought I'd have a bit of a play with this. It's a bit of a joke. If you've got Cyberduck, this is a duck that mounts drives, so it's called Mountain Duck. Sort of cute. And it's a product that lets you mount S3, so I thought I would give it a try. I downloaded it earlier, and I'll show it to you. It adds a little toolbar into my menu bar. You can't quite see everything that's going on up here, sorry, but there's an icon in my menu bar, and it can automatically read my S3 credentials that I've got stored on my machine. And believe it or not, it is already working. If I go and open up a Finder window, and oh, it isn't working. So I go into here and I say, yes, please connect using my credentials that I normally use for the AWS CLI. You should see that I now have an additional sort of virtual drive type thing here, which is S3, and I can now see my S3 buckets. So if I go in here and see if I use my CLI to create a bucket. Yeah, bucket. Stack Rads, I'll call this bucket. Create buckets, make bucket. So I go and make bucket on S3. And let's just copy a file to it. I will copy a file called x2 S3 stack rads. AWS S3 copy. The file called X. So let's go back to here and see. I move away from it and move back to it. Does it see my new bucket? Not see it. Oh, file added. Cyberduck is seen. Oh, here it is. I can see my stack brads folder, and I can see the X file that was on there. What if I was to copy a file into it? I might drag a PNG file. So here I've dragged it into the Mountain Duck mounted S3 bucket on my computer. And if I go here and now say, list me the contents of that bucket, I can see that my PNG file was in there. So it works pretty easily, and it has a very simple web interface and goes quite nicely. And then I discovered that the folks who create Cyberduck and Mountain Duck also have something called a Cyberduck command line interface. And this command line interface is quite interesting in that it allows you to connect to many different web storage services like Azure, Dropbox, FTP, and all that. And so theoretically, you can copy between different cloud platforms. And I will attempt to do that now. I've set up some credentials beforehand. So I want to copy, let's say, from Dropbox to S3. So if I come in and have a look at my Dropbox that is installed on my computer, I think I created a stack directory within here. So I have a picture of either a cat or a rabbit. I haven't quite figured it out. It's a very fluffy animal. And I've got this thing inside my Dropbox directory. And if I do this correctly, I can say duck, copy from Dropbox StackOverflow.jpg, yep, to S3 StackGrads. Now it uses a username in there, so it'll come up with a small error here. First of all, it goes and authenticates against OAuth via their website somehow, and I've got to paste in the OAuth code in there. And then it will slightly fail because it doesn't know how to connect my S3, but that's all right. I can come in here and run the command again and give it a username. Is my access key. I've already given it my secret key, and that in the wrong place. Go to the OAuth thing. I've got to copy this OAuth code so I can access Dropbox. Then hopefully copy, it will authenticate to S3, copy the fluffy file to my S3 thing. Oh, a key must be specified. Okay, fluffy.jpg. One last time, copy the OAuth key. Paste it into there. There might be a way you can do it without having to paste the OAuth key from Dropbox every time. But it's now copying to my folder. If I go to S3, cross your fingers. The file should have been copied from my Dropbox to S3. So that's quite interesting. They've created a CLI that knows how to talk to many different cloud storage services and copy things across. So oftentimes I see people saying, oh, how can I migrate my Dropbox to S3 or copy things between cloud service providers? So it looks like this Cyberduck CLI, put in chat, could be a good way to copy things between those different services. Pretty neat. Thank you, OAuth. How are we going? Any questions out there? Under stack, which database should I select? This is an example of questions that often get shut down. This person wants to know, hey, what database should I use for this particular reason? I've got terabytes of data, I want to use it in a certain way. And when you go into Stack Overflow, there's certain rules as to the questions you're allowed to create. What I might do is just pick a question that has not been closed and show you what can happen. So if I dislike this particular question, this is that WordPress question, I can come in here and say, I recommend closing this question. And it says, why do you want to close the question? And maybe because it's a duplicate. I answered that question last week and you should stop answering duplicate questions. So if I click that, it tries to bring up similar questions that were in there. And it will close off a duplicate. A community specific reason. This is typically where you say, it's not a good question for Stack Overflow, which is meant to be a programming Q&A site. If you're asking about general computing, go to super user. If you're asking about professional networking, go to server fault. You couldn't reproduce it, so that's reasons why you might want to shut down certain things. There's one down here that says opinion-based. The question is likely to be answered with opinions rather than facts. It should be updated so it will lead to fact-based answers. So where there is a question that is an opinion, seeking opinions, it's often going to be shut down. And I voted for it to be shut, but I added a comment here saying you might want to ask on Reddit. And there's two interesting Reddits. There's a Reddit for Stack Overflow, a Reddit for AWS, which has lots and lots of people on there, 500 people online at the moment, chatting away. And there is another one called Cloud, which is a more independent conversation. So if you're asking about multi-cloud questions, a good place to put it would be there. So good places here. I often say if you want opinions, you go to Reddit. If you want answers, you go to Stack Overflow. So that question was closed. This is an interesting one I saw. They have a PHP project with a MySQL database. The problem is the time related to data is showing wrong. They want the time shown to be Mauritius. Where is Mauritius? Trying to do our zoom to the world map. Wow. Off Madagascar, fantastic. Zoom into Mauritius. Wonder what time zone they use there. So not a large place. Let's go to the map. Wow, a great place. I always like dropping into cities of places I've never been before. Chinatown. Let's drop in Street View. Do they have Street View? They don't have Street View, but might have. Drop into the street. Oh, wonderful murals. Look at that. And it looks like there's a tour going on of people looking at murals around Mauritius. Fantastic. Looks like a nice place. So this person wants their database to be set in the Mauritius time zone, and they are not having too much success. So I used to work for a company, and the company was based in Australia, but they had all their servers in America, in California. So they set all the time zones for their servers be the Californian time zone, and when we stored data in the database, we used the Californian time zone. And this led to a problem when the company expanded and soon had servers in other places around the world, had users, internal and external users in other places around the world, and the database became quite a bit of a problem. So normally what I recommend is that, first of all, don't change the time zone of your server. It is generally a good idea to have all servers running on UTC. And the reason for that is if all servers have the same time zone running across, Brad's is saying half your family's in Mauritius. Oh, wow. Do you know where they live in Mauritius? We'll zoom in there. So I was in a company, they hired their first security engineer. The first thing the security engineer did was install a time server. And the reason for that is if a baddie breaks into your servers and goes from one server to another server to another server, and you want to try and trace what they did through log files, you want your times to be synchronized between servers. It also means you want all your servers running on the same time zone. So if all your servers are the same time zone, they all have pretty accurate time clocks, you can trace one user as they go between machines. The corollary to that is if you want to break into people's machines, as you break into their servers, you should change the time and date on it so all their log files are thrown out. So the other thing I've noticed, and I answered this yesterday, was that a lot of times SQL clients do the conversion of times on there. So the database might have a time in, let's say, California time stored in there, but when you do a query, it might show the time. In my case, I'm in Sydney. It might automatically convert a timestamp to show the time in Sydney because it sees my computer is running in the Sydney time zone. And it's not actually giving you an accurate view into the timestamp that is stored in the database. And I can often test this by telling it to show the timestamp field cast as a text field. And if you cast it to a text field, the SQL client will display the raw text from the database rather than trying to convert it into the correct time zone. And that's a great way to try and debug things going on. So while this person is saying they want the time zone to be Mauritius, what they really should do is have their applications handle the time zone correctly. And often web browsers will do that for you. A web browser can convert time based on the user's timestamp. So don't change the server time zone, and preferably don't change the way you store your data into only one time zone. Use a timestamp with a time zone setting in there as well. What is the time in Mauritius? Time in Mauritius. 6:22 a.m. They should be coming online a little bit here. What is their time zone aligned with? They're in the same time zone as Eastern Europe, Middle East. I love how Google Maps these days does this 3D round type view rather than converting it into a flat view. Something else to show you. Somebody else pointed out some of these sites to me recently. If you are into serverless, you might be interested in visiting Serverlessland, which is a website that a number of other developer advocates, hi, my name's John, I'm a developer advocate with AWS, other developer advocates have put together, the ones who specialize in serverless, and they've made this website focusing on some of our publications specifically about serverless topics. So here are blogs just on serverless topics. Here are videos just on serverless topics, governance, cross-region, AWS SAM, events. So many events running out there, meetups and all that on serverless topics. So a really great place to go for serverless. And there's another one if you are into containers. You might watch our Containers from the Couch show, which is on Twitch pretty much every day. And this is a nice index of the different shows that are out there. And you can watch the videos troubleshooting your AWS Fargate task. And it links you to the show that they had on. So if you didn't watch the show live, you can watch it a little bit later. So great ways to just zoom into the content of interest that you might be particularly interested in. Oh, this is one. I couldn't answer this one. I don't know if any of you out there can do it. Chalice. I'm not aware of a website specifically about Chalice topics. No. Chalice is the library for Python. No, not aware of that. Here's an interesting one. This person says, I have a Windows instance with 4 volumes attached. I can create an AMI from this instance from the console that includes only the root volume. What do they mean by that? I think when you create an AMI, you can select which volumes. So an AMI can actually contain multiple EBS volumes. You can even create an AMI and say, hey, when someone launches this instance, please add an additional volume, let's say a data volume. So it doesn't have to include the snapshot of the volume. When you launch from the AMI, it will create new EBS volumes on the newly launched instances. I want to make AMI automation from the command line. I'm not able to create an AMI with a single volume. So let's play around a bit here and see if we can figure out what they're talking about. If I go and launch an EC2 instance, default settings, and by default it gets a, this is Linux, so it gets a default root volume. I'm going to add an additional EBS volume, make it a different size so we can tell the difference. Give it a tag so I know what I'm doing. Do my AMI volume, and we'll just launch that. So this EC2 instance now has 2 volumes associated with it. So theoretically, when I go to create an AMI, a disk image of this machine, will it create an AMI of both volumes? Only my root volume? What can I do with that? I'll just give it that a moment to boot up. While we're waiting, let's go to another instance and just see what happens when I say I would like to create an image AMI. By the way, an AMI is really just an EBS snapshot plus a bit of metadata information. So an AMI of multiple volumes is just multiple disk snapshots with the metadata that ties it together. So here you can see my machine that I just chose has 1 disk, but I can add a volume. So I can say when you boot a new machine from this AMI, please also give it an additional EBS volume, EP2, and blah blah. So when you launch an instance, give it additional volumes, but that's not what this question asker is asking. They're saying if I have multiple volumes, how can I make it give me an AMI that only has 1 volume? So let's choose that new machine. Let's create the image. It's grayed out, so it's got my boot volume, it must be there, and it looks like I can specifically exclude the additional volumes from that. So the question is, how can I do that with the command line interface? Somebody is saying, please refer to this Windows guide, but that is other stuff, so let's figure it out. AWS CLI Create Image. So there is a command line interface command that says, please create me an image. And it has this interesting thing called a block device mapping. And that, I think, tells it how to define the disks that you want included in the AMI. So let's just try it raw first. Let's go AWS EC2 create image. It wants an instance ID. My instance is this instance ID. You remember the old days when the instance ID used to be just like 8 characters? We ran out of instance IDs. Too many regions, too many instances, so they had to go to this like 16 character instance ID. Really huge. Please create an image of that. Can I just run that? I don't think there's many cases where you'd need to store the time zone along with UTC. Slide discussion. So when you're in a database, it's a good idea to store your timestamps with a time zone so that things get a bit smarter later. You want to name, I'm going to name my. So if you can store timestamps in a database with a time zone, it makes it a lot better. Otherwise, you've got to say, if there's a timestamp without a time zone, what timestamp is it? And the best thing to use in that case is UTC, simply because it's a good default one. So I've now created a image of this instance. How many volumes are attached to my AMI? As 2 block devices down here. It looks like I have snapshotted both of them. I'm only interested in snapshotting the main volume. So how do we do this? I'm going to have to use this block device mapping. I have no idea how to use block device mappings. Now, is this only for creating additional volumes, or is it for creating new volumes? Snapshot ID, volume size. So the fact you can specify a volume size suggests to me that this is for creating additional volumes. How do you specify only creating the boot volume? Sometimes I like going to the Boto documentation that's more specific. Create image. Create image. Cannot be used to modify the encryption status. To create an AMI, no, blah, blah, blah. The virtual device name, I don't know. I don't know how to say only create an AMI with 1 volume. What happens if we just specify one of them? I don't know. So can't answer that question. Does anyone know? I'll say it, I can't answer that. Oh, here was an interesting one I didn't get to talk about last week. What did I talk about last week? The fact that there is no S3 command to list objects by their tag. And I found this quite interesting. So Amazon S3 lets you attach tags to objects. I can come in here and add a tag to this object saying food is cheese. Did I do this last week? And it shows that I've got my food is cheese tag attached. And there is a command to retrieve a tag from a specific object. But there is no command that allows you to list objects and their tags. So if I was to go in and say AWS S3 API list bucket name is Stack Rads. Doesn't need more information. List objects. Name. Great. So here I get back a whole lot of information about things that are in my bucket, but you'll notice that there is no tag. There's an E tag, which is an MD5 checksum of the object, but nowhere do I get back the tag information. And all of my efforts, I could not find a place to retrieve a list of objects and their tags. So this person was saying they would like to retrieve objects from Glacier using a tag, but I ran into the basic problem that I couldn't even get a list of objects with their tags to figure out which objects to retrieve. So what you would have to do is get a list of all objects. For each individual object, you'd have to call this get object tagging command, get back the tags, and then figure out if you want to pull things back. So that was news to me, that you can't actually list objects, get back their tags, or their metadata, and S3 inventory doesn't do it either. So I was quite surprised by that discovery. Oh, the version of the day. Let's play with this. Redshift recently announced that they have a data API, and this allows you to directly query Redshift without going through a SQL client. So I'm a Redshift person, so I found this quite interesting. Normally, when you create a Redshift database, you've got to connect to it with an SQL client through an ODBC or JDBC connection. And this can be very hard for Lambda, because in Lambda, to create a connection, you've got to load in a library like a Psycho PG2 or some weird thing that can then talk SQL language type thing to Redshift. But now they've got an API that allows you to use IAM credentials to talk directly with Redshift. So I've never used it. I thought we'd do a bit of live coding. It's always fun. And see whether it will work. I have a machine here, something that lets me quickly launch a Redshift cluster. So for those of you not too familiar with Redshift, Redshift is a petabyte scale data warehouse, originally based on Postgres, but it's heavily forked. So the front end looks like Postgres, but the back end is really amazing. It goes across multiple servers. Normally databases don't run across multiple servers. It's very hard to synchronize. Redshift is built for that. The way it distributes data, runs queries in parallel, is quite lovely. And it can cope with billions of rows in a database. And so we've now got this extra ability to connect into Redshift through an API call. The real benefit of this is you can put Redshift in a private subnet, and from the internet, you can now theoretically make a call to your Redshift database without having to be in the same VPC. This is also good for Lambda, because Lambda functions would have had to connect to the same VPC as Redshift to connect in, which then makes it hard for that Lambda function to talk to the internet. So if it wants to retrieve information from the internet, push into Redshift, it had to talk both to the internet and the VPC. With this, it should be able to talk just the one way of doing it. So let's give it a bit of a try. I have no idea how to do this. It uses the data API. I wonder if Boto has been updated to do this. If it hasn't, I'm not going to try it, because I'm a Python person. So, oh, it has Redshift Data API Service. I'm not going to do it from Lambda, because Lambda might not have been updated, so I'll do it from my own machine. So we want to talk to Redshift. We want to run one of these commands. We'd like to run a query at some stage, execute a statement, or list the databases. So let's see if we can connect in. Pull up some code here. Connect in with Redshift data. I want to, how do I connect to my database? It doesn't say. It looks like I connect to a database with a cluster identifier. Have a look at my Redshift database that I'm launching. There is, oh, it's available already. That's really fast. So what is my cluster identifier? Might be my cluster name. Let's try that out. The database. I think called lab. DB user is called master. Now, how does it know that I'm allowed to log into it? It will use IAM credentials. This is interesting. Let's cross our fingers and see if that works. And, okay. It says it does not recognize Redshift data as a service. And that's because it is a very recent update. The first thing you should do is get a new version of Boto. So I have a little script here that I run that updates all of my pips and Botos and things like that. So I'm going to update my Boto 3, which should pull down the latest updates. Now, I didn't want to do it on Lambda because often the AMI that you get with Lambda is not updated that frequently and might not have the new services. You can do funny things to update the CLI or the Boto on a Lambda function, but I'm not going to go anywhere near that, so I'll just do it on my own machine here. Still have no idea how it's going to authenticate me, but I'm using a user that has admin permissions, so that should be cool. Any Redshift users out there still watching? Those the rest of you, hopefully you'll learn something about Redshift doing this. Let's connect into Redshift using a traditional first. I like using DB Visualizer, which has a free offering. Go into, the other great thing about using the data API is you don't have to worry about security groups. So here I'm having to modify a security group to allow me to connect into my Redshift instance. And if you connect through the data API, you won't need to do that. Current IP address to Redshift security group would then be able to connect into Redshift if it's using the same logins I normally use. Please work, please work. You are not working. DQ8i. Not working. They're not fixed the security group. I did the right thing in. Say Redshift. Go to my IP. Try it again. Yes, so here I am using a traditional SQL client, and I can see my various things, and a good test is to just say select 42, and I'm into my Redshift database. I now want to try and do the same thing in using the API. Boto has been updated, and now run my program. It is hopefully connecting to my Redshift cluster, and it looks like it worked. Let's try a command here to execute a query. Execute statement. Cluster identifier database DB user secret ARN. Know what that is, but we'll just use SQL. Select 42. Give that a run. And what does it come back with? Read the documentation. Would come back with cluster identifier, DB user. How does it give me my response? Runs an SQL statement. can use the secrets manager or can use temporary credentials. Great. Name of the database. Where's my answer? Different command I've got to use to get back my answer. Get statement result. Ah. Get statement result. And it gets an ID from this thing here. Hope this is entertaining for you. And somebody else struggle here. It comes back with an ID in the response. And simply say the ID equals response ID. Give that a run. So it will now go and request select statement, and then it will retrieve the results of the query. Query does not have a result. Query does not have a result. Describe statement. So much for live coding. Describe statement. Maybe it takes a bit of time to run. I'm going to cheat and put a sleep command in here. Sleep for a few seconds. Hope that is enough time for it to do it. So it's making the request, it's sleeping for 10 seconds, then tries to get the result back from the database, and the solution is, oh, it worked. Worked. Somewhere in here, here it is. My result is 42. So you can very easily now query a Redshift database through an API rather than having to use a ODBC, JDBC connector into the database, and I used IAM credentials. I didn't have to give the login details, and that works extremely well. So a bit of live coding that has actually worked. That has surprised me as much as anything. So any of you who are using Redshift these days, I suggest you now start querying. If you do programmatic queries for reporting, still use the traditional SQL connections, but if you have applications talking to Redshift like Lambda, you're a really great way of sending data in there. Well, I've learned something out of that. I hope you have learned something out of that as well. So that's probably about enough time for this show. So thank you for joining me as I learned a little bit about AWS. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about AWS and a little bit about Mauritius in there as well. And let's zoom in and fade away. Brad's family out there in Mauritius. Fantastic. Airport on the side of the island. Fantastic. So thank you very much for joining me on Stack Overflow. I might not be on next week. There might be another event going on next week. I'll have to have a look. But join me for CQ on the day before, whatever you're watching now, minus a few hours for the Cert Quiz show. And otherwise, I will see you online for some other fun live coding and AWS Stack Overflow answering online. So thanks very much. I'll see you later. Cheers. Bye, Brads. Bye, everyone. Kate, now you talk. You didn't talk before. Fantastic. Cheerio.